Welcome to Film Forum Presents, a podcast featuring special live events recorded at our theater located at 209 West Houston Street in downtown Manhattan. In this episode, Film Forum presents filmmaker Stephen Wilkes and photographer Jay Maisel, who appeared for an opening week Q&A for Jay Myself, a new documentary on Maisel's life and career, and his monumental move out of the legendary 36,000 square foot bank building at 190 Bowery that he called home for nearly 50 years. The Q&A was moderated by Adam Walker, Film Forum's Director of Communications.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Adam Walker. I'm the Director of Communications here at Film Forum. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight for the world theatrical premiere of Jay Myself. Jay Myself is a vivid portrait of the great photographer Jay Maisel and of the Germania Bank building at 190 Bowery, long one of New York's most intriguing real estate mysteries. For nearly 50 years, Jay Maisel lived, worked, and raised a family there, and stuffed it chock-a-block with his collections of inspirational treasures. In today's rave reviews of the film, critics have compared Maisel to, quote, a comical amalgamation of William Friedkin and Marlon Brando, and, quote, a cross between Don Corleone and Gary Marshall. And yet somehow these comparisons fail to capture what Jay Myself so brilliantly conveys. Jay Maisel is a total original, and we are thrilled to have him here with us tonight. The film's director, Stephen Wilkes, a former protege of Maisel, is himself among America's most, give it up. Is himself among America's most iconic photographers with a staggering body of fine art, editorial, and commercial work that is included in the collections of the George Eastman Museum, the Jewish Museum, the Museum of the City of New York, the Museum of Fine Arts of Houston, to name a few. His photography has appeared on the pages of the New York Times Magazine, Vanity Fair, Time, Fortune, National Geographic, and Sports Illustrated, among many others. He's also published widely praised monographs, including his study of Ellis Island and his Day to Night project, which was recently published by Taschen. Jay Myself is, incredibly, Wilkes' first feature film. Both gentlemen will join us for a Q&A after, so please stick around. Now to say a few words of introduction, please help me welcome filmmaker Stephen Wilkes.
Thank you so much, Adam. And I have to say, this is like a dream, to be honest. I can't tell you what an out-of-body experience this whole thing has been for me. To be able to share this very personal story with you about somebody I love so much and that has meant so much to me. I want to just acknowledge Adam and the entire team at Film Forum, and of course Dan Berger at Oscilloscope, who's made this all possible, really, to bring it here to Film Forum. What you're going to see is really a very, very personal story and I think what I feel about the film is that I hope when you walk out, you feel like you've been inside the bank, you've smelled it, you've tasted it, and you feel like you know Jay in a very deep and meaningful way. And hopefully when you walk away, you start looking at the world differently. So thank you so much and enjoy the film.
Please help me welcome Stephen Wilkes and Jay Maisel.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Stephen, can you just talk a little bit? You clearly, the two of you have such a beautiful, rich history together. So when it came time to make this film, what was your how did it feel, and what was your sort of process of relating to him as the subject of a film, or of your camera in general, as opposed to a friend and mentor?
Well, it was interesting because for years I had done some commercials when I was young in the business, but I stopped that right away, and I just didn't like the experience. And I'd watched how documentary had changed over the last 5 years, and I used to always tease him. I'd say, if you ever move out of this building, Jay, I definitely got to film it, man. It's going to be the mother of all moves. Never ever thinking that he was ever going to do it. And then he called me. I was 84 years old. He calls me up and he says, "Hey, man, I got to sell it." And I go, "What are you talking about?" And he says, I can't afford to keep it anymore. And at that moment, it was like this confluence where suddenly I knew this was the story I had to tell. and because he's just meant so much to me over the years. And the building was such an integral part of my life. I remember he met my wife there the first time, and he looked at her. She was my girlfriend. First time he looked at her, leaned over, and he goes, "What are your intentions, by the way?" So I mean, this is, we really have a special history there. And I think once that happened, I had to then convince him that I needed to do this, and he was right away saying, "Well, what are you going to do exactly? What are you going to do? What's the story going to be?" Go ahead.
A day or two, and I'll do a little I'm just going to come in for a day or two, do a little shooting.
Right.
My wife, on the other hand, said it will involve a lift truck, possibly drones.
She was right.
And an incredibly large crew.
No, that's not true, but 3 people.
How many people do you just think?
Well, that's after the fact. You see that? You think you have them figured out, and you just don't. Trust me. You can only imagine what he did to the poor guy who he ended up buying the building from. But anyway.
And Jay, watching it back, sort of, how does it feel to sort of see the space through the lens of another photographer?
I love the movie, but it depresses the shit out of me, because of obvious reason. It's very difficult. I've seen the damn thing 4 times now, and it doesn't get old, but it gets, in some ways, more depressing every time, which I don't think other people feel. But I look at it and I think, yeah, that's just exactly how I felt. I sat there with a dumb look on my face when I was asked, "How do you feel?" How do you think I feel?
Was there any particular objects that you saw in the film that you got rid of that you wish that you hadn't?
How much time do we have?
Actually, that's a list. I think he's got a list. Yeah.
No, there were a lot of things I got rid of that I knew at the time I'd be upset about, but, my wife knows that it's very difficult for me to draw a line somewhere and say, okay, I can live without this. I have a tendency to, aim for minimalism and end up with Salvation Army decor.
Are there any questions from the audience?
May sound weird, but I like to collect as well. I have not as much space, so I don't collect as much as you do. But I'm just wondering, in practical terms, who dusted all that stuff?
Oh, that's
Dusted?
What's dusting? Yeah, exactly. It's all about the patina, right, Jay?
Actually, it stayed fairly clean because we had sealed all the windows because of the cost of leaking air. So it wasn't that bad. Much.
How much did the move end up costing in the end, if you don't mind my asking, in front of a room full of people?
How much did the move actually cost in the end, if you don't mind?
I have no idea. I mean, it was into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it was still a lot less than I thought. And the move is not the interesting part. The storage is interesting. That cost a fortune. Something more insightful, please?
I'm curious how you feel living where you do now and how you've settled in.
Am I settled in?
How have you settled in?
I settled in. It took me only less than a year to put up pictures. It took me 3.5 years before I put up the first picture in the bank. There was so much to do. But, I have a nice place. People don't shit on my door anymore.
You don't miss the smell, huh? Yeah.
I had to clean up that word because we did an interview with Leonard Lopate, and he said, there's 7 words you can't say. I had never used the word defecate in a sentence before.
How often do you visit your storage? How often do you look at your own pictures? I know the photograph isn't as important as the photographing, but how often do you look at what's in storage?
All right, you got to tell me.
How often do you go to your storage space? Is that right? And look at your storage?
I kept the photographs. I never put them in a storage space. What I put in a storage space was not any kind of photographs I've ever done. I took them all with me. And I look at them a lot. And I have a lot of them wrapped up, and so I'm looking forward to taking them out because I now have a second space in which I can exhibit work. And I would say that I like to be surrounded by my work, and I like to change it when I get tired of it, so it's a revolving thing. Did that answer your question? If not, keep pushing.
But how often do you visit the actual storage facility?
I almost never went there. It was too depressing because it was like floor to ceiling, 4,000 square feet of boxes, and I knew it was like someday you're going to have to empty those and go through them. I wasn't thrilled about it. I didn't want to go visit my full boxes. It didn't mean anything to me.
I'm just curious, do you still have all that in storage? And if so, do you have a plan for it?
Thank God nothing is in storage anymore.
Yeah.
I have it
Okay.
all, and it's all in one place. And he put it very well. Jay's toys have come back.
They've come back. It's kind of like, Tinkerbell with the magical dust. They follow him, and they've all come back. And he called me about 3 months ago, and he had this high pitch in his voice. He was gleeful. And I go, what's going on? He goes, I got a spaceman. And I'm like, oh, my God, 2 doors away. And I'm bringing them all back.
And you're not coming.
And you're not
over.
coming, he tells me. I go, Jay, we got the sequel. I'm back. No way, man. No way.
One question for Jay and one question for Stephen. So, Jay, did you enjoy the process of having a film made about you? Everything else in life has been your subject, and suddenly the camera's turned on you.
Let me put it this way. Have you ever had a really bad toothache that wouldn't go away over a long period of time? It was a tribute to his tenacity and persuasion that I didn't kill the motherfucker, because I had so many things in my mind. And there was Stephen, and there was Jason, and there were 4 other guys, and
We were a
then
good
there was
distraction,
moving
though,
guys
right?
saying, does this go to Brooklyn? Does it go to storage? And then there was my wife in the background, smiling gently. You're not going to keep that, are you? She was a rock through the whole thing. I could have been truly depressed, but my daughter and my wife teased me so much that life is funny.
All right, so thank you, Jay. So my next question is for Stephen. So much of your work, too, has been about New York. If you think about Ellis and some of the other things you've been doing here. Jay, another. What's the next film that you have? This is number 1. Everyone wants to know what's next.
Oh, God.
So,
I don't know. You know what? This was an incredible experience for me. I love the process, and I think it's going to be something that's definitely personal. I will say something I'm really passionate about, because I really, at this point, when you tell a story and it comes from your heart, that's really, it's hard to go back to doing anything like that's different than that. So whatever it's going to be, the story I'm going to be really passionate about. So
He has the ability to focus on something, which I don't have. He has the ability to stay with a project until it's done. And whatever he does, it'll be insane.
For Jay, you gave Joseph Albers a lot of credit for setting you on the course of photography and the way that you see the world. Did you ever show any of your work to Albers, and did he ever comment on it?
I showed him some. He liked it, but he's a very enigmatic man. He really was a man who did things on his own terms, and he would like to persuade you that he was very eclectic, but he wasn't. It was his way or the highway, and so we had a lot of trouble together. A lot of trouble. He taught color, and I listened to every word with bated breath. The painting was another story. We had completely different ideas about painting. His were obviously much more successful than mine.
Jay, I'm curious to hear, what do you think about the changing landscape of photography? Things like Instagram, things like everyone in the audience presumably has a camera in their pocket and might fancy themselves a photographer.
You're looking at a dinosaur. I don't like Instagram. I would not touch 10-foot pole, any of those social things. I have stuff on it, but nothing I've ever put there. I just believe that the terms of all these places are not terms that I as a photographer want to get involved in.
And do you think that that cheapens photography or that it makes it more accessible?
I think it widens it. I don't know whether it cheapens it or not. I think certainly if you look at 5 million bad pictures that you never had to look at before, then yeah, maybe it cheapens it.
You might say it dilutes it then, yeah.
For Stephen, I'm just wondering, as I was watching the first half of the film, it seemed that the objects were very clearly shown, and a lot of the images, as Jay was going through them, when he was leafing through things were shot from a very low angle. I don't know if it was real or perceived, if I was just perceiving it. And then some of the other photographers, were speaking, and you then went into the colors from 1970 on, and then later there were the other images. Was that intentional to kind of make us want to, see, get down and get in there and see what was really going on? Like,
well, yeah, I wanted to.
Perspective?
I consciously wanted to. The whole. I had worked with a great DP, cinematographer who worked with me, Jason Green. I want to acknowledge him, and Chris Janich, my assistant, and who was really instrumental in helping me shoot this thing. And what started really was, for me, I wanted the camera to float through the space. And that was the way I kind of walked through the bank. It was because Jay had so much stuff going on in the space that your eye would float. And so I wanted to create that feeling. And then I wanted to intermix that by, getting in close to it. Because the whole thing about Jay is, I think, is that if you're curious, he would reward you. And so you would, if you looked closer and closer and closer, there'd be a sense of discovery happening. And so part of the photographic stuff that you saw in the moments, as Jay would talk about color and things, those things I wanted to really connect in a way to the words, to what he was saying, and really try to give you, the audience, a lesson in the way he sees color and connect it. So there was conscious things about the way his images were used and the way he spoke, but in terms of the setup of the film and how we approached it, I wanted to start sort of big, take you in and make you feel like, oh my God, where am I? And that's what it felt like when I first walked in that building. And then you begin to spend time in it, and then you can begin to absorb it in a way.
Well, thank you again so much for being with us and for this wonderful film.
Oh, thank you so much, Adam. This is great. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for listening to Film Forum Presents. Special thanks to Oscilloscope Laboratories for making this event possible. If you like what you just heard, please be sure to subscribe to get future episodes and rate and review so that more movie lovers can find us. Film Forum is an independent nonprofit cinema, and our doors have been kept open for nearly 50 years thanks to the invaluable support of our members and donors. Please visit www.filmforum.org for details on membership, as well as information and showtimes for our current programming. See you at the movies.